For the many AI topics we've explored this week, what is next on the horizon? I'm going to introduce Melissa Heikkilä from MIT Tech Review, who will be moderating this discussion. She'll introduce our next panel. Please join me in introducing Melissa to the stage.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here today, closing off a fantastic week. And I'm very excited to introduce my two wonderful panelists, Lila Ibrahim from Google DeepMind, the Chief Operating Officer of Google DeepMind, and Fran Bennett, the Interim Director of Ada Lovelace Institute. Before we kick off this conversation, we have time for some audience questions. So now's your chance to ask any burning questions of these two wonderful panelists. Now, Lila, Fran, what a week. I hope you both are surviving. I barely am. Now, Fran, you were at the summit on Wednesday.
Yes.
Give us the tea. What happened? Any juicy details?
Well, a lot of tech guys looking uncomfortable in suits. No one wearing trainers, so everyone was in their best, on their best thing. I thought it was interesting they had such a broad range of people, and the first surprise of the day was China being there, which I don't think everybody knew was going to happen. So in the plenary, when they did bring them up and introduced China to the stage, everyone was sort of, wait, China are here, and then second all scrambling for their headsets to put on the simultaneous translation when he started making a speech in Chinese, so we could say, oh, okay, what are China saying then? But yeah, it was a really interesting day with a really actually broad range of people there, which I thought it was worth doing.
That's great to hear. Lila, what was your main takeaway? What did you learn this week?
So many things, but I think the two things stick out. One is there was the summit itself, and then events like this as part of the AI Fringe, where we're able to engage just a broad set of stakeholders, and it's something that personally has been quite passionate to me. I've kind of lived that my entire life and during my 30 plus years in tech. So actually starting to see it come to fruition on within the AI industry, like bringing so much conversation and so many different voices to the table. I think the other thing is just how do we the amount of effort to capitalize on this moment between the White House commitments earlier this year and then the UK AI Summit. You saw a flurry of activity over the past couple of weeks, and including even from our perspective of working to get the Frontier Model Forum up and running with an executive director, announced an AI safety fund sorted, papers published on how to do evals for generative AI. So I feel like it was good to see the executive order from the White House, like there's a list of activity, and just to see this flurry of activity, which is nice to just have out, because now we can talk about how do we move forward from it. So I think that would be my other main point from the week.
Yeah, great. Now, I've been covering AI policy for 4 years, and for 3 of those years, it was like a niche, nerdy topic. When I talked about what I did, people's eyes would glaze over. But everything's changed. This past year has been wild, and I feel like this week in particular has really given this conversation a new momentum. How do you think, how can you seize this moment? What are you doing and looking forward to this coming year?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it has been an unexpectedly wild year for this stuff. So, like you both, I've been working in the area for quite a long time, and then suddenly been surprised that the world also cares a lot about the things that we've already been working on. I think that the really important thing that we want to see next is we've had a lot of good general conversations, a lot of declarations, which seem very positive. Now, how do we operationalize that? How do we make it into hard legislation, hard rules? How do we make sure that there's the capacity to do the things that we're saying we want to do about making this technology work really well for people in society?
Yeah. And Lila, have you noticed a shift in the conversation?
Yeah, I'm curious in the audience, how many of you, show of hands, shift this year? Oh, yeah. I see a couple double hands going up. It's funny, a year ago, I was just reflecting on this. A year ago, whether it was at the United Nations General Assembly or even actually earlier this year when I went to DC in March, I had to use my experience within tech of knowing how to navigate those organizations and events to get a seat at the table. And needless to say, that's not an issue anymore, right? Like the amount of inbound inquiries and people ready to have the conversation. What's exciting to me is the fact that, I have a background in tech, but not in AI specifically. That's really developed over the past 5.5 years since I initially joined DeepMind. And I joined because I really felt a moral calling of how do we bring different voices into the conversation and make sure that we're developing this technology with responsibility in mind. And I feel like in my job as Chief Operating Officer, I've really helped to build that into how we work and who we are. And hosting, we can talk about some of the stuff we've done with civil society as well. And what's really exciting to me now is this is the conversation we're all having. And I think by having it in the public forum, it's enabling some accountability, putting accountability into the system, much like you just mentioned, of we have all of these commitments and communications, but now, and conversations and coordination and collaboration, now what are we going to do with it? Like now is our moment to deliver, and I feel like in many ways, for me personally, it's like this is a moment I've been waiting for in my career of like how do we really how do we ensure that this technology is being developed for future generations in mind? And that's a huge responsibility, but it's also good to be able to be having it with so many people now.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's easy to talk the talk, but what concrete actions should happen now for that to happen?
Yeah, so first of all, there's so much work that needs to get done on how we operationalize it, as you mentioned. And like, this is not necessarily this isn't the headline grabbing sexy work, but it's the stuff that really is going to matter. One, just to give you a couple of examples of things that we've done that I think are important and important for all of us to think about how we do more of. This year we've hosted like a series of conversations with experts within their field, whether it's in education, disability, whether it's just in thinking about equitable AI, bringing together those diverse voices, having conversations about what could AI mean. I mean, we're only moving forward from here, so how do we do it together? And by getting some of that policy discovery in place, I think it really allows us to say, okay, how do we start putting that into action? So I think one is how do we build off the international coordination that's happening here and make sure that we're doing more of these conversations and figuring out what are the concrete next steps to put into place. There's certainly, I think in the coming year, as models get more general and more capable, there is going to be more public scrutiny on this. So how are we actively working on, okay, taking what we've just had in the US and here in the UK and start actually putting it into action.
Can I just add another perspective on that? So obviously it's really good that you are hosting those conversations and having that engagement, because that is good practice. What I would love to see is actually government taking more of the lead here. So government, informed by all of these things, should be also building its own capacity and starting to say, well, what is it that we want to see? What do we declare to be responsible? And then that gives the companies something to react within and to be responsible, right? Like it sets a playing field and a zone within which you can act.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like this is not about any one company or one country or one sector.
Yeah.
Like this has to all come together. And there's certainly things, I think, one of the things that we were really hoping to come from this week is like some common perspective on like what are the risks, how are we going to evaluate the risks, and I think things like the safety organizations that have been announced, institutes, I think are an important part of an example of what you've just mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I think also just broadening our sense of what evaluation is something which has somewhat been missing so far. I think there's a bit of a fixation, probably because the tech companies have started the conversation about the most technical evaluations, and I think we already have a lot of research actually which we could build on what does evaluation of impact when systems go out into society, which is where we see a lot of the harms and benefits happen, that getting a more comprehensive picture of what evaluation looks like there, and then again in terms of government and legislation saying what is it that we want to see here, what does good look like.
Yeah. I mean, the conversation around AI safety, AI ethics has been so convoluted and so confusing.
Yeah.
You know, you have on one end the AI is going to kill us all, and the other, like, we need to focus on the short-term risks. And for a long time, it's felt like those two sides haven't really met in the middle. Do you feel like this summit has changed that conversation, brought it forward at all? Given more, like, do you feel like policymakers have a better sense of what the actual risks are?
I don't know. I don't know what you'd say. I think it's improved things, actually. The conversation has been useful. I mean, Bletchley was a good convening event, and it made a lot of conversations happen. It made a lot of people meet who wouldn't otherwise have met. And I think that's actually very helpful, just in broadening people's concept of what things are. And I know it feels very complex, but I mean, if we think about other topics which we've managed, I mean, we've been talking a lot about safety this week. We talk about drug safety, right? And if you said, oh, well, are drugs and medicines, are they good or bad? Do they kill people or save people? And the answer is, well, both, right? Like, there's not a single simple answer to this. It's that you have to unpack, like, ways in which you want this to work well, ways in which you're going to make it safe, what varieties of national and international institutions and agreements and all of these things do we need to build up this spectrum of things that make it work well.
Definitely. Now, one of you mentioned the AI safety institutes. Now, that's like a very concrete outcome of this summit. How do you think they should work? Like, what needs to happen for them to be a success and meaningful? Lila, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think, well, there's the safety institutes happening, and then there's also the Frontier Model Forum, and I think both of these are examples of, like, where governments can collaborate and then where industry can start establishing some norms. And by having these norms in place, I think it just makes, it's kind of a one-stop shop where we can have, I think, better coordination and collaboration, and do it in partnership between the public sector and the private sector. You know, I think a lot of details clearly need to be worked out, but having, for example, early access to models and being able to do evaluations. We just recently released a paper on how to think about doing evaluations for generative AI. Like, that can be a starting point for some of the conversations. But now, again, how do we do this? How do we do this in a more coordinated way, especially given with the speed in which the technology is developing?
Yeah. Fran, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting slightly ahead of me, because actually I was thinking, well, this afternoon I really should sit down and say, what from our ADA research do we need to see from safety research at work? So I haven't done that yet. So just sort of early thoughts, really. And we know that government lacks central capacity to understand these technologies and also to support the rest of the framework of government in regulating well, understanding things well. So those safety institutes, I hope, will provide a good centre of expertise there. I would like them to be scientifically led. So in the Bletchley Summit, we actually heard an excellent readout from the scientific panel that was there about trying to determine what are the open questions which we need to answer. And I think if those institutes can start from, again, as I said before, what as people in society, what do we want to see and what are we worried about? What questions does that throw up? What researchable questions are there here? And then go from there. I think the risk is that we start from what technical work can we do? Yeah. And then we miss the full picture that way round. So yeah, if we can start from people in society centric, then fan out into, therefore, what safety research, what capacity do we need? I think it could be a great success.
Yeah, great. Now, at the summit, civil society was a bit of a late addition. Can you tell a bit about what happened? And did you feel like you were listened to?
And we were there in the room as equal participants with government and with tech company CEOs. So in that sense, we were listened to. I mean, I don't know what conversations behind the conversations were happening, but we were certainly there in the room. I think actually the existence of the Fringe was really helpful in making it clear that there was something really important to say from civil society, and that this wasn't purely an industry and government matter. And actually, I think in the rooms I was in, the civil society conversation was the most interesting and rich. I mean, I'm very biased, obviously, but I think we were just genuinely trying to work out how do you synthesize this in a positive way, and get the interests of all of this aligned to the outcomes that we'll want to see. Yeah, we were invited later than other participants, but I think that's partly a result of the summit being declared, and then everyone trying to work out, well, what can we do with this? What do we want to do with this? we all feel it's an important topic, but how are we going to progress it? And I think now we've got some more summits in the diary. That could be a really positive sort of checkpoint to say, okay, what to your point earlier about operationalising, what concrete progress have we made since last time in terms of operationalising and not just going around the same conversation?
Yeah. What I thought was great about the summit was that you had lots of countries from the global south, giving speeches, and that is so important to get a diverse set of views in this technology that affects us all and shouldn't just be led by the West or like one country. How do you think we could make this conversation even more inclusive? Like what would you like to see?
I have a strong opinion on
okay,
this.
Go.
I actually think this just has to be part of how we organizations operate. Like you can't wait for these milestone events. It really needs to, or have it as a bolt-on to anything that we're doing. It's how do you actually plan up front when you're doing whether it's like you're starting your research or that you're actually building out a product or a program. Just a couple of examples of things that we've done, and again, just to help bring this to life, we did some of our socio-technical research around decolonial AI because we felt it's really important to make sure that we're actively bringing in voices into the conversation. And just to agree with your point here, there is representation. We did see the global south here, and I think that's important. We can focus on okay, the glass was half full. Now, how do we fill up the rest of it? And then another example would be when we were working on our protein folding AlphaFold and the database. We recognized that actually we want to get this into the hands of people who can do something meaningful with it. So from the very beginning, we engaged the Neglected Disease Institute to ensure that some of the scientists and biologists from the global south who may not got equitable access knew how to use this and could expedite some of their work, which maybe wouldn't be necessarily funded by pharmaceutical companies because it's the return on the business ROI. So I think these are just examples of ways that we're trying to actively build this into how we work. And it's not, is it perfect? No. Do we have more work to do? Absolutely. But I think it's got to start somewhere. And by having these examples, we can talk about it more openly and also continue to challenge ourselves and our colleagues to continue thinking about how to build this into our operations.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your idea.
Yeah, I mean, the global south, rest of world, we're present but not central. I think in this version of the summit. So I think again, this is sort of that is important as a starting point at the next summit. I'd love to see it be more genuinely global in terms of the topics covered, the people who were the keynote speakers, that sort of thing. So I think it's a conversation which needs to mature a bit further.
Yeah, great. Now, so the next summit is in 6 months in South Korea. So what's on your to-do list for the next 6 months? What's next for global AI governance?
Can we have a nap first?
I think this year has taken us all, this year has been a lot. This week has been a lot. This week has been a year, something. I think we really, more than, there's not just these events again, it's like there's all sorts of activities, including, we were talking about earlier a little bit, about the elections even next year. When you start looking at what the coming 12 to 18 plus months look like, there's a lot of things that we have to just get right, and we have to move beyond these talking of things like how are we going to put the executive order into practice? How are these safety institutes going to work? Are they up and running? Are civil society actively engaged and a part of the conversation and leading in areas? How are we really addressing the near-term issues of misinformation and representation and bias? How are we dealing with misuse? How are we thinking about the long terms? There's a lot on our agenda, and we just actually need to start doing it. So I think when we look 6 months ahead or into the next year, I think there's, again, let's take a step back from this week get some sleep, and say what are our objectives, what are our key results that we want to deliver. Hopefully it's not yet another set of promises, but rather actually building off of the commitments that we have already made.
Mm. I mean, yeah, and there is the like, what are the OKRs for all of us? And in very pragmatic terms, in the UK, you know, the things like the Bletchley Declaration are talking a really good game on what we want to do here. We've actually only got a couple of windows of opportunity to make any legislation. So there's a very practical thing, which is what are we going to tie this to in terms of the King's Speech or the DPDI bill? If so, we need to get going on that and know what should go in it. And we also have a really clear understanding that we need more capacity within things like the new safety institutes, but also the existing regulators, which are really good, but which are underpowered for the things that they need to do. So giving them the capacity, the funding, the support to enforce the powers they already have, in fact, and do that really well, I think is really important right now.
Yeah. Did you get a sense that, I mean, traditionally in AI policy, you have sort of three different schools of thought. You have the European, let's regulate, it's, strong binding laws. You have the US sort of techno-libertarian approach. And then you have the Chinese approach, which is, I guess, more focused on licensing and obviously control of freedom of speech. Do you feel like this summit or anything that there's more of a global consensus on how this technology should be regulated or any unifying thoughts?
When we were talking about what we had hoped to get out of the summit, we focused more on coordination because consensus is, you just got to start somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the fact, to your point, that we had others at the table, mm-hmm. and we started to share and start that perspective sharing, I think was a useful outcome and that we had hoped for. It definitely, this kind of gets into, even in the executive order, there's a lot in that 100+ pages and getting in clear on, okay, what really is a frontier model, or how are we going to do the evaluations? It's going to make it really hard if everybody is doing different things. So I think we're looking towards how can we start building from this. We now have like a puzzle that we're putting together these different pieces. So maybe that's something that we look to, is how do we move more towards some consensus? Because AI, unlike, I keep thinking back to when we were building out the internet or the computing industry, we had hardware and there were physical things that we had to think about at a national regulation perspective. But AI is borderless, right? You release a model, release the technology, and suddenly it's around the world. So we'll need to figure out some type of international standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got to do both, right? Like international standards don't make sense unless you've also got a national picture of what you want to do. But yeah, I mean, AI is borderless, so is much of the internet, so many cross-border technologies. So I think these problems aren't things that we've never encountered before. They're not easy to solve, and we've messed them up a bunch of times before. So I think the issue is learn the lessons from when we have messed it up and do it well this time.
Which I think actually has been quite helpful, right? On having. I often get asked about, okay, on the heels of social media, right? This is part of the reason why I think we can talk about risks and safety, but also the opportunity, and maybe some of that recency and the experience that everyone has, or the shared experience in it.
Regulation takes time, years even. Even the AI Act, which hopefully should be done by December, will still take 2 years to enter into force. And I think there's a real sense of urgency around these issues, and the onus really lies on companies right now. Can you give me some examples of what Google DeepMind is doing in sort of short term, immediate term to tackle these things?
I think the Frontier Model Forum is a good example of where the pace is happening quickly. So by having the companies together, and we recently announced the executive director, but this is about how do we share best practices and start doing operating norms while the government conversations are happening, so that it is, again, and by being open in the public about this, there's that accountability back into the system. So I think those are, we all recognize this. We all are doing within our own organizations. We have our own. We think about our responsibility in terms of how we govern internally in the organization and all of our research. responsible research and development, and then how do we deploy the technology in a responsible way. The example on the diseases and even the AlphaFold database as examples there. We may be doing that within our own organization, but then what does it look like when you put these companies together and sharing our different perspectives? So we do believe that regulation is required, but if we can get our operating norms aligned a bit more, then it'll help inform the policy conversations. We can help with some of the knowledge sharing with policymakers and civil society, and then close the loop of their feedback back into how we operate.
Yeah. Fran, what do you think of this? Is this enough, or would you like to see something more?
I mean, this actually, I was going to say, as a member of civil society, like, I think we also have something to do right now before regulation happens, or alongside it, which is to attempt to channel the voice of society about what is it that good would look like. So industry getting together and trying to work out some norms. I think civil society attempting to channel public voice more broadly should also try and work out what do we think the norms should be? Like what is the benefit here? What risks do people experience, or might they experience, and how do we build a good picture of that? And you know, some of that research is not new, but I think just continuing to pull that together and articulate it in as coherent a way as we can manage with such a messy topic, I think is very important.
Yeah, great. I think we have time for some questions. Does anyone in the audience have any? Okay, over there.
I'm impressed you can see.
Yeah.
Hi there, thanks very much. My name's Susie Madigan. I'm a humanitarian advisor at CARE International, which is a humanitarian relief and development organisation. I also write The Machine Race, looking at AI from the perspective of the Global South. So to the point about decolonising AI, it's fantastic that DeepMind has done a lot of this thinking about what is the approach to decolonising AI, and it's something within the aid sector that is something we're still struggling with, is how to decolonise aid. But there are various ways in which we're trying to get to grips with putting power and funding into the hands of partners in the field and getting them into the spaces about not only governance issues, but also kind of how to actually run humanitarian organisations themselves. So I'm just thinking about where is the bridge to do that within AI, and actually the operational steps that must be taken so that there are people from Global South civil society at the next summit, that they are also at roundtables thinking about the design of AI. And can international NGOs help with that, with the network of global partners? But just thinking how to actually make that happen, given that we haven't got a huge amount of time. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
There's a lot in that we just covered. And there's a few things that I took out of it. One is, first of all, how do we just ensure that that there is some AI coverage in the spaces, and we're doing some of that knowledge sharing. I think there are a lot of programs actually that are currently underway. We have tended, just generally from our perspective, we've tended to focus more on because we know it all starts with getting the research right and the technology right. So we've got a program, for example, across the African continent on AI education to try to help with that pipeline. But we do have a part of our organization that is focused on partnering with NGOs, specifically on knowledge information. So we can share some of that, but again, it's just one part of it. I think it's also helpful to have questions like this, because it's like, okay, well, how do we think about building this into the plans? When asked, do we have the right folks around the table? The summits that I mentioned earlier, the policy, one of the best things that came out of us doing those salon dinners is it forced us to, I forced in a nice way, but it really helped us to build those connections and insights. So when people come to us now, we have referrals of like, oh, actually, you want the expert on this arts topic, or you want this on the impact of AI on food. Here are folks that you need to be talking to. So I would say, kind of connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with us as the organization, and I think this is where we look to some of the think tanks and other parts of civil society to really help bring those parts and help amplify the voice.
Actually, I just wanted to pick up on a different part of that, which I think is really important, and I didn't hear mention it, but actually I hope it has been discussed at the Fringe, which is the whole supply chain of AI, which is a really important question, I think, which when we're thinking so much about the outcomes of using the technologies, we tend to elide the supply chain, which could be quite a colonial thing in many ways. So it's enormously energy and water hungry, actually building these models, which are built by a small number of companies with large concentrated power, sometimes on the labor of real reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is often people in low-income countries, and sometimes the languages then that these particularly generative language models work in are not great for anyone who doesn't speak English. So there's a lot of pieces here which are behind the scenes, and which I think it would be fantastic to actually unpack and have a lot more transparency and conversation around those as well, because I think that could be a lever of some actually quite bad outcomes in the world at large.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something we don't hear enough of.
I don't know if it has been covered this week, because
No, it hasn't.
I think I think it has been part of. This week I think it hasn't. I think there are a lot of, when you look at some of the work that is happening, there are some examples of how do we ensure like fair wages, or what are we doing for. But I think that your comment and idea of like how do we think about it as a supply chain and shine a light on that part of the conversation.
This is a product.
Yeah,
right?
no, I think that's actually a really cool idea.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one, and it's easy to miss because you have this sort of super intelligence image of these magical things that come from nowhere, and actually they come from labor and resources.
Well, and speaking of labor, we haven't even talked about the impact of AI in education. And how do we make sure that what we are doing too is not just talking about this for where we're at right now, but that we're equipping youth of today with the skills and how to use the technology in a responsible way as well. And I think that's a critical part of the conversation when we're kind of take a step back and look at where this is going.
Yeah, definitely, great. I think we had a question over there.
I can just speak.
Yeah, I think the mic's coming.
Hello, thank you so much for your time and for your comments. I have a question about evals. I think that governments and labs, but governments in particular, like the UK, seem to be banking on evals as a really, safe and robust method of ensuring that AI is safe. Unfortunately, they've obviously proved to be ineffective and imperfect, particularly when we consider evals for social implication or bias. So my question is, should we be doing evals? What else could we be doing? Should we be trying to actually just design AI systems differently to be kind of robust and explainable in some way from the very, very beginning, from data collection, from design, from who are the people making these systems? This is my question, is evals.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you think, Fran?
I mean, I think that's a great question. Evals is one of these funny terms that suddenly arrived this year. It seems to be, it's just short for evaluations, but it's suddenly started to carry a lot of weight and to sometimes mean like what can we do with code to test what these systems do. I think it's a great point. I mean, both the meaning of evaluation right now seems to be very narrow. And I think that is a miss, actually. Like I think there is a place for technical evaluation and benchmarking. I think that is just such a small slice of understanding the expected impacts of these systems. So you actually need to evaluate in that sense, but also do various other kinds of evaluation in the round, both pre and post deployment, to make sense of these systems. Also, to your point, actually you can evaluate much more easily if you understand what's gone into a system, and it's not just this blind artifact with an API. To the comments about supply chain earlier, I think understanding much more how the sausage is made is really important.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Sorry, but you didn't finish.
No, that was it. Carry on.
Okay, follow-up question. Because obviously, the Safety Institute in the UK is going to be doing evals, and perhaps other safety institutes will be doing the same. What else could or should these institutes be doing other than just, pre-deployment, but like post-development evaluations?
Well, I mean, I think they should be looking at both of those and working out what is the framework of things that we want to be able to do. And I thought there was I said before, there was a really good readout from the scientific panel during the Bletchley Summit, and I thought the scientists there were raising really good questions about what is it that we need to test for here, and actually having that expertise in the room, determining what it is that we need to test for, and then working out how we do it, rather than starting from, we're really good coders, what can we do with really good coding and mathematics, which, I'm a mathematician by training. I love doing stuff with maths, but I have to acknowledge it does not solve the whole problem at all.
Can I give a company, it's like a company perspective here? There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So even just in terms of building a team, I find being headquartered here in London for Google DeepMind has been quite transformative for how we even build our team, the values that we have as an organization. It's quite different than my experience in Silicon Valley. So part of it is like the interdisciplinary nature as well as the ethnic diversity of the teams. So that kind of gets in from the beginning. But then there's focus on the technology development of areas like interpretability, technical safety. All of these happen inside of the research organization. Then we have socio-technical research as well. And what we do inside of our organization is red teaming as well as the evaluations, but it's not just within our organization. We also find ways to give model access and have others red team. So an example would be recently in the United States at DEF CON, provided model access so that we got different perspectives in, and it wasn't just our own internal bias. And that aspect of bringing the outside voices in, it gets really critical, even, again, back to AlphaFold as an example, with bringing additional biology expertise in before we made a decision of even whether to release it. So I think there's different steps in the development that happen that may not be visible to everybody. But I do think red teaming is another area. And the other one I wanted to highlight is we often this year are focused very much on generative AI, but that's not the only type of way to develop these models and systems. And so I think that it is really important to remember that we're kind of on the first step of a longer journey, and that's going to be, so as we talk about this, we just need to be thinking broadly, and how do we do all of this testing? We're never gonna have completely perfect information, but if can we do it in a way where we're still maximizing the opportunity while mitigating the risk, and have that feedback loop of like learning from getting the testing so that we can kind of build that in. I think that's actually going to be important. It's not just a one and done, but it's trying to also highlight where we can have a positive impact with where managing the risks.
I have a follow-up question. I mean, you guys are under immense pressure to release models, right? And come up, like, stay up to date with the competition. If your evals or red teaming or anything flagged, anything suspicious, or like you just concluded this isn't safe, like would you kill a model? Like how far would you go?
Yeah, in fact, I think that our history has shown where we have had even the technology, but we didn't have a way to talk about the risk. So back in 2021, 22, we actually held back on releasing even technical papers until we had socio-technical and ethic research around how do we talk about the models, the risks, and the opportunities. There's a lot of stuff that gets developed that never gets released. This is a part of like almost the scientific process and the way the technology is developing. And then, we are always evaluating relative to the technology we have out today. How does it compare? Do we need to do more work on it or not? So I think this is part of just the cultural development. But I mean, anybody who's developed a product before knows that you've got to weigh the risk and the opportunity. But yeah, there's a lot of things we haven't released.
Okay, question here in the front.
So I was wondering, so the European Union had this H-like group in 2020 that published the Trustworthy AI, you could see, a manifesto of, I think, over 50 pages long. I was just wondering how useful that will be for going forward, and how, say, DeepMind has, you could say, applied trustworthy principles in the, you could say, way
old school AI policy. All the way
responsible AI, trustworthy AI.
I think from the time DeepMind was founded in 2010, out of UCL here locally in London, it had principles and foundations. So it's built in from the very beginning of the organization. And I think we've became a cornerstone for the Google AI principles during the acquisition in 2014. And so I feel like we've always been kind of checking on like our operating, not just the AI principles, but then also a separate set of operating principles of like that had positive commitments as well as managing risks. So I think we're just generally always keeping an eye out and making sure that we're holding ourselves to the best practices. And then, but it is evolutionary, right? Like so much every year. Where we were a year ago, we were talking about that earlier, where we were a year ago versus where we are now, the way that the technology is developing, how do we build that in? I don't have a specific answer beyond that.
Yeah. Great. Okay, question in the back.
Thank you. Richard Saldana, I'm representing the Institute of Science and Technology. So Google DeepMind strikes me as being a really responsible company in terms of sort of ethical development of its algorithms. Do we really think that the AI Safety Institute is going to save us from the less scrupulous? And I'm thinking specifically, resources in terms of checking models, but also the sheer complexity of the models. I mean, I'm sure Google DeepMind grapples with its own models, let alone looking, if you're asked to look at anyone else's.
I can give an initial answer on that at least. So the models themselves are not necessarily that wildly complex, right? It's that there's an enormous amount of data going into them, and it's very hard to audit what's gone in, and therefore to theorize about what might come out or how we might want to control it. I think it is very important to resource things like a safety institute well, so that they have the capacity to really make sense of models and to have a good broad-based understanding of what they can do, what they can't do, what we're worried about, what we're not worried about, so that you can create a safe and positive environment for all this to work. But I don't think we should imagine it's impossibly complex, actually. I think what risks and benefits are we thinking about is the impossibly complex part. The models themselves are not the impossibly complex part.
May I comment?
Sure.
So I teach machine learning at postgraduate.
Oh, well, there you are.
But even I find, fairly simple neural networks with just a few hidden layers quite difficult to decipher.
Well, this is so this is right. I'm simplifying massively. So the mechanisms that create the models are not impossibly complex, is what I should say. Obviously, the emergence of the structure is then it's kind of black box at the moment, right? We don't have good ways to unpick what they're doing or look at the internals. But what we can do is we can know what data has gone in, what types of processing have happened, and then what behaviours we can test at the other end. And I think that piece is doable, but then the fact that they're black box models does mean that you can't simply lay out that, it's not a supervised learning model, right? You can't just look at the weights and know what's going to happen when you test it.
I think this is also an example of like where having, the governments can set up the safety institutes, and it's important to have the collaboration from civil society and the private sector, the technology companies as well, to help inform. Because it really is going to be a collaboration and knowledge sharing. We will never have the national security insights that the government will have, for example. So it doesn't, there's only so much red teaming we can do as an example in that space. So I think everyone figuring out where the best practices are and how to work together is going to be really important. And we've seen this happen. I was a part of the UK AI Council, and I see several of my colleagues here. Like, that was a great example of bringing industry, academia, civil society together to help inform and provide guidance on this. And even the UK AI Summit, there was that solicitation of input, I think was a critical part of the process. So I think it's really up to how is the institute set up and what does that collaboration look like?
Great. Thank you all for your questions. That's all that we have time for. We have 15 seconds. So I want a quick tip from both of you. You know, there's a lot of momentum right now around AI and lots of people wanting to get into AI and AI policy. What's your one tip for someone and how to break in? Fran, why don't you?
Well, there are going to be a lot of jobs, so if you're interested, there'll be a lot to do. And I think my one tip is just start from thinking about the people, not the technology. I think it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole of the technology first, which is super fun and interesting, but does not actually solve the problems. If you start with the people in society angle and then say, how will we work technology towards that, I think the outcomes are going to be much better.
Great tip. And Lila?
You know, again, having not come from AI as a background just in the past 5 years, it's like everybody has something to contribute into this. You know, get over any imposter syndrome, like lean in, and take the opportunity to learn sooner rather than later, because there's no going back. And you know, even if you have children or youth in your lives, help them understand this technology and what it could do. Like, we wouldn't be in this field if we didn't believe in the potential that this has for humanity, and getting our kids to learn how to use this in a responsible way is going to be a key part of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, and thank you for all your brilliant questions and for listening to this panel conversation.
Thank you so much to Melissa, to Lila, to Francine for our final panel. I've just got a few final thoughts before we wrap up, because that concludes our week-long programme here at the Knowledge Centre at the British Library. We are so glad that you could have joined us for our programme this week, whether in person or virtually. Today, we reflected on the conversations we've had over the last week. Conversations on AI safety, AI in the law, election integrity, democracy, the impact on a range of different industries. Crucially, we also looked ahead to the future to start thinking about what continued proactive collaboration around AI looks like. As we've said throughout the week, this fringe is intended as a jumping off point for further conversations. Please do share your own ideas and reflections from this week with your communities, your organisations, your friends and your families. Please also keep this conversation going on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn in particular. You can catch up on any sessions that you didn't see on our YouTube channel. Finally, it has taken a large group of people working behind the scenes to build and produce this week-long programme of events. We only started talking about a fringe 3 months ago, and I think it's fair to say it's all come together pretty damn quickly. Our thanks to the entire extended team at Milltown Partners, our brilliant team at Bureau, our event production team, and the British Library for helping us bring this important event to life this week. Special thanks also go to our partners who made this all happen, and I'm going to take a quick opportunity to name them all, because it really is an incredible list of organisations who we've had come together in the last couple of months. Accenture, the Ada Lovelace Institute, the Alan Turing Institute, Barclays, the British Academy, the British Standards Institute, the Centre for Democracy and Technology, Clifford Chance, Colour in Tech, Faculty, Ginkgo, Google DeepMind, the Institute for the Future of Work, Mozilla, the Next Economy Trust, the Open Data Institute, the Partnership on AI, Phoenix Court Group, Responsible AI UK, the Royal Academy of Engineering, the Startup Coalition, Tech UK, and Workday. There's a lot of names there, but this has been a huge achievement, so thank you everybody for playing your part. And most of all, thank you, our engaged audience today and throughout the week, both in person and online, for making this such a significant and successful event. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Enjoy your weekends.